Okay, YouTubers, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, we're painstakingly going through the directions in English and trying to get an understanding of the reference to the pictorial in the book, and then cross-referencing that to the different sets of prints. So we can understand how these reference numbers correlate to a location or a part, and using that information before we start gluing and cutting. Just trying to understand all the parts. So using a pencil, I wrote part numbers on these pieces of laser cut walnut, and giving myself a reference quicker than the paperwork to be able to find the part when I need to, and then start gluing them together. So giving myself a little bit of head start and being able to locate the part I need next as I'm going along. So this is going to help. Well, I don't have all of them labeled, but the ones I'm most concerned about are the ones I'm trying to understand as where they're referenced as a part number in the drawing. This is a good example here. These little blocks have one hole in them for one rope, and they're a certain length in millimeters, and that block is, assuming that block is part number 468, and there's so many of them, as we just saw here. Looks like there's two 468 blocks right there on the rope ladder, and that would help us when we go to do that part, being able to understand. Another trick I'm doing is putting a line every few parts in there, so when I go across, I'm not confusing it with the next column or the next part up or down. This line helps me keep in line with the part I want. So that 468 is down here near the bottom. 468 blocks. There are 3 millimeters, and there's 51 of them. They're made out of wood, and if there's only 51 of them total, that gives me a good reference to go by, because I can actually count these in groups of 10, which I did on that particular block because that's a very common one, and verified that there was 51 blocks in there. And that helps me understand which block to pick when I start using those blocks. See, I got some here that are 91 pieces, part number 331, but there's some other ones over here that I got a feeling are going to be another different part number, even though they look the same. There'll be a different part number because there's a different amount of them, and you'd be used somewhere else in the plans. Maybe these would be on the deck of the ship itself, and these would all be in the rigging up above or whatever. So that's the kind of stuff I'm trying to get a handle on before I go to step one. And you can see that group of parts here will be some of the stuff we go break out of here and sand and get ready to glue up and start with the assembly. But it's easy to jump the gun when it looks simple like that to start. But like I did on the first or the last model we finished, it we may have been a little bit too anxious to get started and not did enough homework, so we get a better understanding of what they want us to do in order to get this assembled. A lot of the problems with this particular model maker or this company is that starting from photo 1 here, I have a fairly sizable paragraph or two to go by, and as I get further along into the prints, there's only 3 or 4 pages of information to tell you what to do, along with the photographs as a reference. And then they'll make it even worse by saying, okay, for photographs 48 through photograph 75, I have this one little paragraph. So for like 20 pictures, I'm dependent on the pictures, not what they're telling me in the book, because the book doesn't tell me. So that's a little discouraging, because they sort of leave it up to you to decipher. You get to 48, to step 48. I pretty much got to do all my work based on these steps, and that referencing to a part number, and the part number telling me what size it is, and going from there one step at a time. And that's going to be not guesswork, but a lot of back and forth research between this and the part list and the big drawings that they give us. So it's going to be fun. We'll just hang in there, and when they say PREC, that's a pre-cut piece, which is good because that's one of the laser cuts. But like this walnut piece here, it's 3 millimeters by 3 millimeters by 125 millimeters long, and there's one of them, and I think that's the keel. So that's a simple one as far as pieces go, but just like in that step there where you're putting together something, each part needs to be referenced back to here to verify the size that you're going to cut if it's not a pre-cut piece, and then cut and sand and, oh boy, glue and stain. Some of the stuff we'll have to stain as we go along, because you won't be able to get your stain application in there later on. So that's what I'm putzing with today, and of course something like this comes in really handy when you're doing this kind of stuff, because you need to reference every part and every dimension, and it's almost impossible with a ruler. You almost got to have a pair of calipers. So that's what we're working on today. Get everything identified. Another example of that is this, all the way down to the threads. 0.25 millimeter, 0.15 millimeter, don't pick the wrong one, 0.8 millimeter. So, you know, as you go from one thing to the next, there's a lot of detail that you got to take into account. These bundles got 5, 10 different kinds of sizes of wood in them. See, there's some square ones and some rectangle shaped ones and some little ones and big ones, and walnut and basswood. Everything's got to be identified, cut to length, glued, sanded. So that's the kind of stuff I'm working on. These are probably all the that's going to be used in a bunch of different places. So we're going to keep at it, and I'll update you when I'm ready to start gluing the first frames in. Okay, as you can see here, we got a print taped up to the display case of the other ship. We spent a lot of time going through these prints and, you know, just trying to find these parts and then label them ahead of time so that we're not confused and discouraged and guessing what part is what. So got a lot of the ones that I was worried about labeled. We went ahead and started popping some pieces out of the laser cut. And I use this here. You can see there's a little spot right there that the laser didn't cut through, and there's only a couple of them on each part. So I just take this and I go down in there real hard and cut it loose, and then pop them out of the frame, sand them a little bit. And we went to the first step in our book and in our photographs, and we glued up step number 1 and step number 2, and we got a head start on step number 3. So I had to glue all these deck boards onto that laser cut piece of plywood, and after we trim off the edge here, that'll go down in the bottom of the ship for part of the cutaway view. I just got this heavy weight on them 2 sections so the deck boards can dry. I'll let it dry for a couple hours before I mess with it. Once you start cutting away on them edges, you got to make sure it's dried good. But we got the beginnings of the first few laser cut pieces installed, and glued onto the false keel, and that's just sitting in the old ship frame from the other one to hold it up. And we're moving right along, so using the dimensions that they give us in the parts list, we had to cut 30 of them deck planking boards, 155 millimeters long, and glue all 30 of them onto the deck. So we're just plugging away at the very beginning here, and once I get to a spot like this where I have to wait for something to dry, I'll go ahead and look through the next step and see what stuff I need, and if I can go ahead and cut it out and sand it up and get it ready, and just try to keep on moving. But that's our progress so far. I like the way this one drawing shows your 1-to-1 scale. This thing's going to be pretty big compared to the other one in there. So it takes up the whole case there. But plugging away. Well, here's the progress after one day. All these weights on here to hold everything together while the glue dries. So that's the back end of the boat. This lower deck will be part of the exposed cutaway view. And we're on to step 5 today. We got these members cut out. We gotta sand them and get them ready to glue in there. But we're plugging away. Okay, today we got the rest of the main ribs glued in. We just stuck this in there to help line them all up with those grooves that is pre-cut in this piece. We got to remove it now to put this other deck in down here. So I got all the planking glued on. The lower front deck piece. That'll go down in there. gotta cut and trim the edges off. It's been sitting under the weight all night drying. And we got the rest of the pieces for the bow, laser cut pieces, all cut out, ready to install. But we'll do this little deck here first. Get it in there. We got to mark up all the holes for the nails holding the decking down. And then we got a bunch of these ribs to put in across here. They got to be pre-marked and cut to fit that angle. That 5 by 5 millimeter walnut. That'll take us step 5 and step 6 once we get those decking pieces in. Step 7 is all the ribs on the crossing ribs. And then step 8 will be all these pieces in the front that we glue on. So that's the progress so far. One board at a time. Okay, we got the 3 pieces that hook together on the inside, glued up with the planking on them. I'm going to let that dry before we cut those edges off. And this is the door frame and the door that's going to go in that opening. And then I still got to take a bunch more of these strips and cut and glue them onto this little utility box. It looks like a utility box. And then it mounts on the outside of those 3 pieces that go down in the bottom of the ship. Then we got to put a whole bunch of tacks in the edges of those pieces after we get them trimmed up. And we got a bunch in there. But keep plugging away. Oh my goodness. This little room here took forever. You can see the little utility box there. So we made up these 3 walls and put planking on both sides of the outside too. We made up this little box and made up a door and a door frame and a little handle to open the box and a handle to open the door. And then you can see these pieces are slotted so they'll fit together. But the tolerances on where it rests on the main rib of the ship and where it comes up to the below the deck, a lot of these tolerances were way tight, so I had to open stuff up here and there to get the right fit. But we got it in there. And I think it's in the right spot. That was the other issue. So if you look at this, that's definitely the bow of the ship, and this is the port side. So the port side is going to be the one I think that's open. But if you come look at this pictorial, that's that lower deck at the bow. There ain't no little room there like we just built. It's around the mast. There's the door. It's around the mast, and it stops over here, the rear deck. So I said, uh-oh, what's going on here? Because that doesn't jive with the way this photograph shows you installing. That's definitely the front deck, because it comes to a peak. The rear deck doesn't. It has a rounded. So it butts up against the end of the front deck. And then the block in there is where the mast comes down. But the pictorial shows it over here. And there ain't even no mast over here. So something's funky with the way they built that. And I took the picture of the I don't know. So I do have it installed, and I think it's going to be fine. I went ahead and put planking down on this cutaway deck. That'll be below the main deck. There's the main deck there. I haven't started on that yet. But in the process of working all this out, I had this one part off the big thick sheet of plywood, and I'd already pre-marked all these, and that says it's number 77. Well, when I go looking in here trying to find that part where it goes, because that was one of the last ones I had left. I already done all these. Now this one left is where's that go? So part of the problem is that little utility box that we built is using up that number 77. And that's over here on a real thin sheet of plywood. So there can't be two 77s. So I went digging in the prints again and found that they made a typo on that part. And that part is really right here. It'll get installed later on after I put the top deck on. So that'll go up here like that. That was something I ran into that had me scratching my head for a while, along with this little room install. But we got it. Barely. So while I was waiting for my planking to dry, I had to add planking on the both sides of this. After I'd done one side and put the little nails in there, of course the nails were too long, because that's all they give you is real long ones. So I drilled a hole here, use that crosshair to line up the spot where I wanted to put the nail. And I made a scribe mark on the board, and I pre-drilled each nail hole with this half millimeter, half inch, 0.5 millimeter drill bit, so that the nails would hold, because they're 0.7. And then punch the nails through there with a little hammer and then cut them off. And then went on to the next one. After I got them all nailed and cut off, I came over here to the grinder in the back of that board and ground those cut nails smooth. That way I could put planking on the back of these other two boards. This one here is not going to be visible through the cutaway, so you can see the butts of the cut of the nail heads that we cut off, or the tail of the nail we cut off. But that's what the plan showed, those little nails in there. So we're on to step 12 next, because we got that little room installed down in there. So not too bad for progress this week. Today's Saturday, I think, after New Year's, which I wish everybody Happy New Year's, and thank you for all the subscribers. And I think we're up to 720 something now, and thank you for watching. See you on the next one.